We certainly see fiber as just as critical as power. With these new crown assets, I think we can provide a really unique solution to a lot of our data center customers, either serving them on our existing network or building out greenfield for them.
Hello and welcome to Cool Vector. I'm David Snow, your host. And today we're joined by Arnav Mitra, Managing Director of EQT, Jonathan Friesel, Senior Managing Director of DigitalBridge, and Bill Long, Chief Product and Strategy Officer of Zayo. We are also joined by Phillip Koblence, a longtime data center executive with NYI and Nomad Futurist. We are talking about a major bet that the three of your organizations have made on the future of edge digital infrastructure. We're going to dive into that deal. Before we go there, I'd like to understand the macro opportunity around why you made this investment. Let me just set the stage a little bit about how the three of your organizations are related. In 2019, EQT and DigitalBridge acquired Zayo in a take-private transaction for $14 billion. Very recently, there's been a next wave of investment. Zayo will acquire Crown Castle Fiber Solutions for $4.25 billion, and EQT Active Core Infrastructure will acquire Crown Castle's small cells business for $4.25 billion. Jonathan Friesel, why are you excited about the edge digital infrastructure opportunity?
The Crown deal is actually a twofer, right? Because it's actually edge and core, because today the core is no longer just being, in the middle of Northern Virginia. It's about being everywhere where you could find space and power. So when you think about this transaction from a Zayo perspective and our investment in Zayo, we think it accelerates both parts of our business. First, with respect to the core infrastructure that we provide for hyperscalers, data centers are going more and more places, and we're producing the fiber, we're building it. But now by acquiring this, we've now increased our landscape. And when you look at this transaction, very little of Crown Castle's fiber connectivity and its revenues are actually coming from hyperscalers. So we see a whole new way and a whole new bunch of fiber that we can now deliver to our customers. When you get to the edge side, that's where we touch the customer, the enterprise. And this is where we're able to now connect the other side of the AZ, where we're taking more fiber deeper to our customers and facilitating not only their connectivity, but also as some of our hyperscale customers move more to the edge, and they go to more power, we're going and providing fiber to connect all those elements together at the same time.
Bill Long from Zayo, talk about sort of your perspective on this next wave of investment and sort of what it says about the future of edge digital infrastructure.
There's been a long-term trend, if you look the past 10 or 15 years, across, increasing, accelerating digitization of all businesses, as well as the adoption of cloud has been these great macro trends to drive more and more bandwidth needs for enterprises, businesses, towers, even homes. So there's been a long-term trend of just increasing bandwidth needs. And if you look at the assets that we're acquiring, they were selling to carriers, they were selling to enterprises, they were selling to towers. The trend of those businesses was a good growing trend business. In my view, we're getting a free option on the edge. The price at which we got these assets, it was a good bet on the business that they already had. But if you look at where bandwidth is going, we're doing deals with a major retailer in the US that has distribution centers. Their distribution centers have tons of robots running around with, forklifts and cranes, and all of that's automated going back to major data centers. If you think about your house, you have tons of cameras. Those cameras are going to be linking back to the closest AI locations that they have. None of that is yet priced into, or that demand has really made its way into the market. And we really got a free option on where the world is going with increased digitization in factories, in homes, in the demand that's going to be on your cell phones. The long-term trend we bet on for cloud and digital acceleration was what was powering these businesses in the past. But the order of magnitude increase that as AI starts to permeate everywhere is a free option. No one knows how much the demand on these is going to increase. But the way that this deal came together, it was a good asset at the right price with a gargantuan upside option value that I think is there.
What I think has made the front page of all the papers over the course of the last, let's call it 2 or 3 years, particularly in, the data center world, is this like insatiable desire for power and powered land and all these, AI factories that are going up. And I think missing from that conversation a lot of times is the contextualization of, is it just power? Is power the limiting factor? Is power the only thing that's important? Where does the fiber element of it fit into this broader picture that investors would appreciate outside of the ones that are already kind of exposed to the space?
First of all, DigitalBridge is a big investor in data centers too. We have about 16 gigawatts of power data centers across our portfolios. So this is exactly what we think about day in and day out. And you hit it right on the head. That was part of the twofer comment that I was making before, which is it's not about just going to the major data center hubs in Northern Virginia. And we're actually talking strategically with our customers about how they develop their plans, about how they're not just relying on those areas. And you're right, you need to have attractive power. And, obviously there's sort of generation capacity, and then you need to have capabilities in the grid to actually service that. But then you need the connectivity piece as well. And you need both of those things coming together. And when I know EQT, it's the same thing. We talk actually very strategically with a Microsoft, Google, Amazon about those specific needs, because when they're doing their site selections, they're saying, hey, wherever you can go on a route, if there are places where you could stop off where I could get land and power, we're really interested in that. And that creates great opportunities for them, right? Because now they could connect to more places and take advantage of where there's power opportunities in the market. And for us, it's great because, we may be doing a custom route build and we're able to generate more customer demand off of it because there may be laterals that we could take off of that, where a couple of years we might not have had that same sort of demand, right? It may have been, going only into the main markets.
I would totally agree with that. At EQT, we're invested in a company called Edge Connects, which so far is primarily connected to hyperscale customers, but there's certainly the thesis of eventually connecting to edge data centers as well as those grow in number. But fiber is certainly just as critical to the data center ecosystem as power is. And we've seen certain data center customers, as Jonathan said, pick locations based on not only power, but also fiber, and sometimes not picking their first or second choices, picking based on when they can get connectivity. So we certainly see fiber as just as critical as power. With these crown assets, I think we can provide a really unique solution to a lot of our data center customers, either, serving them on our existing network or building out greenfield for them.
I sort of view it through the lens of physics and economics. If you're doing sort of geospatial optimization of where you want to put data centers, is it cheaper to bring the people to the power or the power to the people? And so if you compare the cost of building power transmission versus bandwidth, it is 4 to 10 times more expensive, depending on the location, to build power transmission than it is fiber. It is more economical to build the data center where the power is and to bring bandwidth to it. But when you're looking on the map, you're looking like West Texas, there's that huge Stargate facility going in and, outside of Abilene, that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So you need to look on the map and look where the most proximate long-haul network is that you can link into, and that becomes your next cheapest option for where to build to.
It's not just the cost element to it, it's a timing element. The data is being generated now. I mean, I have an Oura Ring, I have an Apple Watch, I have a phone. The Edge is in my backyard. We're all wearing it. And the only way to bring the data closer to where the stuff is processed is over the networks that you guys are laying. I do also want to give Bill some credit for being the first person in the history of Cool Vector to use geospatial a response. So kudos, man, kudos.
He's giving you the light stuff, right?
This is I'm gonna pull out my thesaurus.
Latency certainly matters, but I think what people sometimes don't realize is it takes 100 milliseconds to blink your eyes. And so when people say, hey, we need to be, 2 milliseconds away from, there are very few use cases that require that low of latency. So in some cases, if you're doing like robotics or something, and it makes sense to have equipment on the factory floor to run the robotics. But in a lot of cases, most everybody is designing for 20 to 30 millisecond latency. And so if you draw a circle around a major metropolitan area with 20 to 30 milliseconds of latency, it's a pretty big radius. So you can serve a lot of the market with a pretty big latency radius, but you got to have the bandwidth to wherever, the data, the connectivity is going to happen to serve within that latency sort of radius.
Phil, just to your other point about speed, I mean, that's an important part of why we're so excited about the Zayo and Crown thesis here, right? Because it accelerates our footprint, but also because we're marrying these assets with Zayo, and Zayo's got a reputation for, being able to handle the massive projects that are out there, right? They require sophistication. They require reliability, right? You have to deliver on time for your customers. That's incredibly important. When stuff breaks, you have to be able to fix it. And as you know, building infrastructure has a lot of pitfalls along the way. All of a sudden you find out there's, a cemetery on the way, or, some government right of way that you got to get past. And our CEO, Mark Anzi, likes to say, the amateurs have gotten out of the business, right? It's time for the professionals. With the needs and how mission critical some of this infrastructure is today, that's why a company with Zayo and Crown, as Arnav had mentioned, in terms of their reputation for high service quality, reliability, really, really matters in the market today. And so the combination of the two companies is really, really important.
Let's talk about the origins of this partnership and go back to 2019. Maybe we can throw this question to Arnav. Pre-COVID? Pre-COVID, it was a different world. People thought that they were going to go to offices to work back in those days. Let's talk about the case for Zayo going private. Arnav, what was your original thesis and why did it make sense for EQT and DigitalBridge to partner on the acquisition of Zayo?
We really liked the market trends around B2B fiber and what Zayo was doing. Zayo was built up through acquisition largely, 40 plus acquisitions by Dan Caruso and his team to create the asset, which was a very nice and leading player in industry. We saw stable and growing usage of bandwidth by a number of users. At that time, the big drivers of bandwidth were cloud applications, were streaming, were content delivery. In our investment memos back then, we certainly had AI as a bullet point. I don't think anyone expected it to come this fast and at this magnitude. So it's certainly been an upside to the case. And really the thesis was we have some of the best fiber assets out there, a very unique footprint, really serving our top carrier and hyperscaler customers. And how can we better serve those customers? How can we become more strategic to them? And how can we, sweat the assets a little bit better outside of those top 10 customers to a broader customer set? Over the past 4 or 5 years, the team has done a really nice job of broadening our footprint. We're selling a lot more on-net business to customers outside of the top 10 at Zayo, which comprise effectively a majority of our revenues. And Crown, by the way, that's their bread and butter as well. They're excellent at selling to kind of Fortune 5,000 customers. They have a very dense metro network. They serve their customers. They price new business very quickly. As Jonathan said, when there are outages, they move very quickly. The customer NPS scores at Crown are extremely high. So it's a very strong fit with what Zayo's done and really what our thesis was. We have this immensely valuable asset and let's find the best way to monetize it.
Bill, from the Zayo perspective, what were the benefits of going private?
Zayo was the agglomeration of 47 acquisitions at the time. And I think being able to effectively integrate 47 companies, there's a bit of a J curve that when you want to move from an agglomeration of 47 companies to a company that can operate with one network inventory, a coherent end-to-end quoting and ordering experience, there's an investment case, multi-year investment case you need to make in order to get through that J curve that is very hard for public companies to make. Being a private company, being able to make those long-term value creation bets is a better instrument to be able to make those without, waking up every day or every quarter to have the public markets judging you for whether you're doing the right things or not. So I think it is a vehicle for what we need to accomplish to create long-term value. It was a much better instrument than being a public company.
A lot happened between 2019 and 2025 when these Crown Castle transactions were announced. Did your thesis around Zayo and its potential for growth change at all during that time? And did those changes and your understanding of those changes inform the decision to do these 2 Crown Castle deals?
The Crown Castle deal is center of the fairway for what we intended originally and what our go-to-market is, right? At the end of the day, we're a customer-focused investment firm, so is EQT. Zayo is a customer-focused company. And so if we can take more solutions for our customers at any given time, we're going to make that acquisition at the end of the day because it helps us, service our customers better. We, as Phil was saying, we can move faster, can go more places, we can fill needs. And it also allows us to increase another segment, right? Obviously, the sexy stuff is always to talk about the hyperscale and the, what is it? I think we're up to like $350 billion of hyperscale CapEx this year from the top guys. Every time you look at it, it grows. So that's the exciting part, but we also like the non-exciting part of the business because that's where we're passionate, which is serving that enterprise, right? Solving their data needs, helping them connect to their cloud provider, helping them connect to their AI partner. Crown, as Arnav was saying, I think it was like 98.5% of their business is focused on, the non-hyperscale side of the business. So that combination with what we're doing on the enterprise side, right, really creates a behemoth and opportunity for us to really service our customers well.
What was the case for EQT and DigitalBridge in particular as the owners of these assets? What resources and sort of strategic guidance are you bringing to this broader platform?
Both of our firms had a ton of collective experience. EQT is a global firm. We've been invested in both B2B and B2C fiber globally in the Nordic countries, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Spain. And DigitalBridge obviously also has a fantastic reputation in these markets. We're very well aligned and we see the world in a very similar way. As we started looking at the asset and articulating our strategies and our cases and our plans, it was almost like we were completing each other's sentences, and it was a very logical fit, I thought. And so far, in this journey, I think we've been 100% aligned in nearly every decision we've taken. It was a large transaction, so it required a partnership, and it's been a great partnership so far.
How does this transaction relate to DigitalBridge's land and power bank?
So obviously that's an important part of our overall investment strategy. In order to meet the demand needs, having access to land bank is really important. So if you look across all of our platforms, power and land is a very important part of what we do. And most of our companies have, very substantial land banks, maybe too much, but probably not. We call it intelligent risk, right? We want to be able to flip on and meet that customer need as soon as it comes on. And so that requires to take some financial risk in terms of making sure that you have capacity available at all times. I mean, we do that on the Zayo side as well, on the fiber side, where, we're always building extra capacity. In the spreadsheet, it may make things look a little bit worse, but, being able to have that incremental unit of capacity available to your customers is super, super important. From our customers' perspective, the fact that Zayo, with the partnership with DigitalBridge and EQT, can deliver both, right? I could sit there with my partner, John Mock, who runs the biggest private equity data center portfolio in the world, and we could sit down with a customer and they say, okay, John, where can you build us at the right price with the right amount of power? Jonathan, where can you help us with Zayo to bring the connectivity to the location? They would love to actually give us their playbook. I mean, obviously there are issues with them sharing it because then people then, front run them on the lands and things like that. So they actually can't do that. But generally, they're always testing us to see where our data center development capabilities are matched with what Zayo could do on the fiber side.
People think digital infrastructure is all one thing, and it is decidedly not. Or fiber is all one thing, and is decidedly not. When you have Zayo, which had a reputation from the previous acquisitions, whether it was AboveNet or MFN before that, and all of the various other elements of layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 connectivity, and you layer on Crown's kind of reputation really as more of a tower company and then a fiber company, how do those things kind of fit together? How do you effectively communicate the differences and the capabilities of whether there's elements of, small cells and tower? How do you distinguish that, and how do you think about that from an overall kind of playbook?
I think of it first through, what are the products we have to sell to what customers and in what geographies? That's why we love these assets so much. Like, it was a very clean portfolio of fiber plus wavelengths plus basic connectivity with those assets sold into carriers, enterprises, and towers, which is a direct alignment to the products and customers that Zayo was serving, but they did it in different geographies. So if you look at the geographies that this unlocks, New England around Boston, down in Miami, in LA, around Houston, it unlocked geographies that previously Zayo did not have a good footprint in. And then if you look at the customers that we're selling to, carriers and enterprises, a lot of them serve all of those metros. So when an enterprise issues an RFP and they say, can you serve my office in LA and Chicago and Boston and Miami, we'll be able to check more of those boxes. So one, the products and the customers were a great overlap. There's sort of a network effect with the more geographies you cover, the more deals you can win, because you can say yes to more of the locations. If you think about how all this comes together, where 1 + 1 can equal something more than 2, those are the dynamics of how the assets together equal something more.
I know Zayo had some exposure to international networks as well. Is there any international element to this at all, or is your focus really on US-based growth?
Yeah, we still have an investment in Zayo Europe. So we spun that company out last year, but it's still owned by the existing ownership group. And you're absolutely right. Biggest complexity about separating that business was actually to make sure that we have all the multinational capabilities that we have in place right now, because guess what? Edge is going to happen in Europe too, and it's going to need to speak to a lot of the core that's developing in the US. And then you've got things like, the Middle East. There's expectations that that's going to be another AI hub for Europe. And so, we do think about this globally as well. We were very, very careful to make sure that while we thought there were abilities for Zayo Europe to focus better as an independent entity, the strategic combination, we actually have a company that links the two companies. Its only job in existence in the world is to make sure that we're selling both networks effectively. And so that was also an important part of the transaction. And you'd always have to make capital decisions, would it be US or Europe? And so by having Europe being able to make its own capital decisions, we're actually able to service our European customers that much better as well too. And that was another transaction. If you look over the last year, it's been a been a huge year between Crown and that spinoff for where we're really changing the game for how we can service our customers.
We know that the data center opportunity in the world right now is largely, by weight of dollars, is a greenfield opportunity, and that's where the kind of preponderance of the capital is going. How much of this investment and how much of the growth going forward do you see being tied to greenfield developments versus maintaining the existing network?
I think it'll definitely be a mix going forward. I think, you'll see the large portion of our bookings or a new book business be on the network or very close to the network, but there'll certainly be a big portion of our business and of our CapEx dollars that are tied to greenfield builds for our data center customers. As Jonathan mentioned, it's not Northern Virginia or Phoenix or some of the big data center hubs of the past. We're seeing some of these new hubs being built out and the prospective builds to those areas. North Carolina is an example. Kentucky is an example. The hyperscalers are looking, pretty widely across the country, and we want to be there to help them build their infrastructure and partner to them. But we're certainly also focused on sweating the assets, especially the ones we're buying in concert, with what Zayo previously had and selling on the network.
We know that right now the data center world is seeing a lot of delays because of parts and labor shortages. And a lot of that is related to the intensity and the hugely collaborative effort necessary to get one of these things built. What is the difference with building greenfield assets on the edge digital infrastructure side of things? Is it as intense? Does it require as many resources? Is there less of a lead time? Help us understand that world.
The problems are very different. If we look at our total bill of materials on what is like imported and requires, complex supply chains to enable when you're building fiber, it's a much simpler supply chain. The bill of goods needed to actually construct the fiber. The hard part comes with the permitting. When you're building a data center, you're building in one municipality, and so the permitting on the one municipality is hard. When you're building a fiber network that might go a couple hundred miles, you're going through dozens or hundreds of municipalities and getting the underlying rights negotiated across all of those and getting them permitted becomes the long pole in the tent relative to, complex supply chains and constraints on transformers and other things like that you see more in the data center space. So it's complex, but it's complex in different ways.
You've seen so much innovation over the course of the last, let's call it 10 years, where we went from, 1 gig to 10 gig and then kind of 25 and 40 gig happened. And then we immediately went to 100 gig, and now you're seeing 400 gig interfaces. How much of that innovation is your focus internally about, keeping up to speed with optical innovation trends with a lot of those hardware suppliers and trying to stay on the, I hate the word bleeding edge, but I'll just use it, the bleeding edge of that from a speed perspective, as opposed to just leveraging the sheer capacity, the amount of glass that you have, and growing laterally instead of vertically?
Ultimately, we are deep believers in the physical attributes of fiber. So I think one way to think about it is people are like, oh, isn't satellite going to completely replace the need for fiber? Or isn't wireless going to completely replace the need for fiber? The sort of way I explain it is if you take like a paper towel roll and you whisper in one end and you can hear it really loud on the other end, but if you whisper at the same volume, it's harder to hear. If you're trying to do something with satellite or wireless, that's just a wave. And so being able to constrain a wave in a piece of fiber is always going to be several orders of magnitude more efficient for conveying large amounts of data relative to broadcasting it over an open medium like the air, which is like satellite or wireless. So at the physics level, there is a fundamental advantage for using fiber, and having fiber infrastructure that's in the ground is going to be a long-term asset that only increases in value over time. Now, how you monetize that with keeping up with the latest bleeding edge of 100 gig or 400 gig or whatever the next speed is, absolutely, we're going to stay at the front edge of that. But fundamentally, it's based on what are the physical attributes of the infrastructure asset that is in the ground. And we are deep believers in the long-term value of that physical asset.
From an amortization schedule, is there a timeline to glass? Let's take glass as an example. After 20 years, after 30 years, is there some significant benefit over kind of greenfield glass today versus the fiber that was put in the early and mid 2000s?
The glass that was put in the ground in the early 2000s has lower attenuation. So basically, if you push a laser through that piece of glass, that light will diffract faster. So it does require a bit more expensive gear that you put on the end of that fiber. But the fiber they put in the ground 20, 25 years ago is still usable. There does come an economics point that like the fiber that's put in the ground more recently is cleaner fiber and you don't have to put as expensive of electronics on the end of it to make value of it. But it is a long-term asset that even after 25 years is pretty freaking powerful. The glass that we're putting in the ground now is going to continue to be a long-term asset even 20, 30 years in the future.
So I want to take advantage of the fact that we have two of some of the largest investors in the world, certainly in digital infrastructure. What are some macro themes that DigitalBridge will be pursuing? Where do you think you and your team are going to be spending a lot of time?
And we basically divide our business into three sectors. Data centers is the largest. Historically, towers has been our next largest, but prospectively, fiber is going to be communication services, or where we see the future for the exact reasons you're talking about. So on the data center side, right, on the hyperscale side, the good news is that we've got massive platforms already in place. We think our position as investors on the scale that we are with the expertise we're not just plain old money in the sector. We're actually money plus expertise. When we're looking at some of our project level returns, we're looking at a deal right now where we just got the development contract and we can off-sell it to another financial player and take a profit without ever having to spend $1 on it. There's a incremental value that you create, called value add, as if you invest with, an expert infrastructure firm like a DigitalBridge or an EQT. On the fiber side, connectivity is increasing, bandwidth needs are increasing. That goes both on the enterprise side, platforms like Zayo on the commercial side, and then on the residential side, obviously broadband connectivity to consumers and enterprises is still paramount. There was a study a bunch of years ago when they talked about the hierarchy of needs, and broadband connectivity came up ahead of water, which literally means that people would rather die than lose their broadband connection.
EQT is one of the biggest investors in the world and certainly one of the biggest digital infrastructure investors in the world, broadly defined. Where will your team be spending its time and attention going forward in the digital infrastructure space?
There's slight nuance in that, we're investing across all of infrastructure, so including energy, transport and logistics, environmental as well. But how those sector teams at EQT can work together, I think is especially unique. Now we're bringing EdgeConneX, our data center platform, a few of our power and renewable companies, Cypress Creek and Zalestra in Europe, as well as Zayo providing the fiber connectivity. How we can offer the hyperscalers and the big customers one solution and one turnkey, I think is super interesting. Our view, formed by speaking with the largest customers out there, is that we're in the early innings of this thing as it relates to AI. There's some blips along the way, but we only see the trend, improving and accelerating over time. Serving the hyperscalers in the best and most comprehensive way possible is a key theme for us. And fiber to the home as well. We fiberize a number of European countries. We're now attempting to do it here in the US. We have a platform called Lumos, which is in a joint venture in partnership with T-Mobile. So the US has, a long way to go to be fully fiberized. You see pretty full fiber penetration in Nordic countries and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, et cetera. We also have fiber to the home platforms across other underpenetrated European countries, Germany and the Netherlands in particular. So bringing broadband to homes and democratizing fiber, as well as helping build out, AI infrastructure globally, is our key focus area.
Is there an element of co-opetition to this? I mean, I have to imagine that EQT and DigitalBridge compete in certain areas when they're not partnering. You're partnering in this one, but you're potentially competing in other areas.
I don't think there have been that many instances. Everything in B2B fiber we've looked at through Zayo, so we've obviously been partners together. We certainly see each other in the market with assets competing on bids sometimes, but there haven't been that many instances when we've been head-to-head on asset. I think DigitalBridge has, so far, they've been slightly nuanced and different, whether it be geographical focus or sector focus or customer focus.
Yeah, look, I think it's been a great partnership. I've enjoyed our collaboration. So I think there are a lot of complementary components. And, quite honestly, if there was a sizable transaction, I think we would do this again. I think it's been a good partnership.
I have a question for Bill. You've been in this market for quite a long time. You've seen different market cycles. What makes you excited about the current opportunity in digital infrastructure and makes you excited to be part of the build out of the next wave of digital infrastructure?
I think getting the timing right in digital infrastructure, that it is one of these boom and bust businesses. When you can get multiple cycles that overlap at the same time, that can sort of multiply their amplitude, it becomes a really interesting space. We're still on the growth side of cloud. And then when you overlay AI on top of that, and then you have, an increased interest in fiber to the home, you have these multiple cycles that are all landing at the same time that are bringing a confluence of demand that I haven't seen in my 25 years of being in the industry. It's very rare that you can get a confluence of overlapping trends that are hitting the growth curve at the same time, that you can outrun other parts of the business that might be shrinking. Now that's the luxury, because Zayo doesn't have a bunch of legacy Sonnet and MPLS and voice business as a boat anchor, that we only happen to be in the sort of the data center to data center growth and high bandwidth and fiber to enterprises. There's just a huge macro demand tailwind. And when you have a boom time like that, you get a lot of dumb money chasing bad deals. The way to get good at building networks, you can only learn it at the school of hard knocks. Unless you have the bruises and you've learned from getting those bruises, I think there's going to be some people that do some bad deals, and we'll be here ready to pick up the assets and do something interesting with them once they arrive on the other side.
Jonathan and Arnav, it's worth noting that the supply of people trying to raise capital for data centers, for digital infrastructure, has also exploded. What do you see in some of these newer entrants to the market? You don't have to name any of them, but what do you see that impresses you? What do you see that makes you worried?
If we have the opportunity to develop projects and then monetize them by selling them to some I'll use the word less experienced, people that are entering the market, that's a great business model for us, right? Because then we could reuse that capital to continue to, add increased returns for our investors. And there are times, quite honestly, where you got to just get out of the market, right? I mean, there are times where the amateurs come in and, what someone values in a different industry doesn't really apply to fiber, for example, and they apply different metrics and they go, oh my God, wait a second, there's capital intensity in this business. I forgot about that. Where's my cash flow? And, sometimes there are bad business investment decisions that get made on that basis. But as Bill said, let them build it and we'll buy them someday. It may not be for what they were expecting, but we hope that there continues to be rationality in the space, right? We don't delight when one of our competitors screws up their build and our customers are kind of, screwed as a result of it.
Having lived through booms and busts, do you see a world in which the pendulum shifts to fiber operators trying to get back into the kind of data center business and trying to control that digital infrastructure? I always have seen them as two entirely different businesses, and it's never really worked. But that doesn't stop the pendulum from continuing to swing back and forth and then combining these assets because they are, in the same relevant ecosystem. And at some point, the way you get economies of scale on paper and the 1 + 1 = 3 mentality is to try to control the entirety of the asset.
Having lived in both the network world and the data center world, I was at Equinix for 10 years. The fundamentals, everything from capital allocation to operational expertise, they are very different businesses. And if trying to operate both businesses under a single roof, at any given time, you will give more oxygen to one part than the other just because the capital paybacks are going to be a little bit different. And then the operational expertise you need in order to have field techs on hundreds of miles of route is very different than how you operate a data center that's in one physical location. The technology is obviously different. So I think everything from capital allocation to operational expertise to the customers you're selling to are relatively different. I think it's a hard case to say the best way to optimize it is to have both of those under the same roof. I'm skeptical, but I could be proven wrong.
What would excess look like in the digital infrastructure market? What would be some symptoms of way too much capital coming in and chasing deals and people making decisions that are perhaps not wise from a risk return perspective? What might some of those projects look like?
My guess is it's speculative projects, right? So if you look at Zayo, right, we know who our anchor customers are before we build the route. In the data center side, we're not building data centers unless we know we have a lease in hand. Then you get into the spec build and, that's when you create oversupply and things like that.
On top of speculative builds, I'd add, anytime you're giving your assets away for free as a source of capital, it feels a little frothy.
What do you mean by that?
Anytime you're doing long-term IRUs of your assets and you have no further opportunity to monetize them, that feels more like an asset sale or a capital infusion. Perhaps you need the capital, perhaps you're over-levered. We've seen a little bit of that in the market.
Excellent. Well, a huge thank you to Arnav Mitra from EQT, Jonathan Friesel from DigitalBridge, and Bill Long from Zayo. And of course, always a huge thank you for the expertise of my co-host, Phillip Koblence from NYI and Nomad Futurist. Thank you so much for joining a Cool Vector program, and I hope I can have all you guys back on in the future.
Thank you.